With MPs set to vote on arming the Syrian rebels, would such an action only fuel further bloodshed?
MPs are set to vote on arming rebels in Syria. Will it only fuel further bloodshed? Tessa Jowell.
I think that I would vote against arming Syrian rebels, putting more arms into Syria. I think that the situation has changed over the last year. Those who are allied with the rebels are not just Syrian national insurgents, but Al-Qaeda, other jihadist groups. I think it defies belief that you can provide weapons only to the people that you want to receive those weapons. I think that what we should be doing is twofold. First of all, taking a lead on the rather paltry start that was made at the G8 earlier this week to reach a negotiated solution which has got to include the Russians. And I think now, with new leadership in Iran, may also be the time to bring Iran in to and around the negotiating table, and also to redouble our efforts to deal with the appalling humanitarian suffering of civilians in Syria itself, but then also the displaced people in the refugee camps on the borders of Syria. That's where our effort ought to be going, not on arming the rebels.
It seems that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, at least considering arming the rebels, Boris Johnson, he talks about whether Parliament will have a say on it. What's your take on this?
I think the Prime Minister and William Hague are doing the right thing, the honourable thing, in trying to put pressure on Assad of Syria, who is running a completely nightmarish regime that is killing hundreds of tens of thousands of its own citizens. I think 83,000, 90,000 people have died. That's the objective. That's the diplomatic political objective in talking about arming the rebels. It's trying to get Putin to focus on what is happening, trying to put pressure on him, and trying to get from carnage. I have to tell you that you agree with me just now. I don't share anybody's optimism that you can get those arms to the right people. I think you're absolutely right in what you say, Tessa. Some of the people who are fighting on behalf in the rebel army are some of the most unpleasant jihadis that you could possibly think of. You'll have seen some of the stories about the atrocities that they've been committing. As far as I can make out, and I've dug into this as best I can, those stories are not false. There are some really terrible things being done in the name of the rebellion in Syria, and I do worry that any engagement by us in trying to arm them would simply intensify that conflict. And then we would be in the terrible position of trying to make sure ourselves, physically, that we were getting those arms to the right, right people, to the so-called Democrats. And I'm not at all clear that we could ensure that. And even if we could arm those rebels to the point where they defeat Assad and install a new regime in Syria, it is far from clear to me what kind of a regime that would be. I'm afraid this is one of those appallingly difficult choices. I understand totally what David Cameron is trying to do. I think he handled it very, very well at the G8 the other day. He's trying to put the maximum pressure on the Russians.
Isn't it dangerous to open up the possibility?
I would not vote for arming those rebels. I certainly wouldn't.
But clearly, you say you wouldn't vote for arming the rebels, not that you have a vote in the House of Commons, but isn't it dangerous to talk
I wouldn't support it.
All right, you wouldn't support it. But is it therefore, in your mind, not dangerous to talk up the possibility of giving arms? You say this is a way of bringing Assad to the table. But if you don't intend ever to use arms, is it right to say that you might use arms to help the
well, of course, the UK government is not alone in this, and this is something that's now supported by an option that's being canvassed by other EU countries and indeed the United States. So, you know, when the United States speaks, they do. I think people around the world in the Middle East know they carry a big stick, and you've seen people will be aware of what's happened to regimes that the United States has threatened in the past. So, it is not a wholly, I suppose, meaningless threat, but in my own judgment, it would be absolutely impossible to carry it out.
A lot of people with their hands up. The man in the green shirt there, you say.
Why are we even considering arming external forces when we're sacking 5,000 of our top troops with 15 years' experience? We're recruiting new recruits for our army at minimum salaries and sending them ill-equipped into these war zones. Why are we sending billions elsewhere?
OK, and you, sir, here. You were shaking your head at what he was saying. You disagree with him?
I'm a former army officer myself, and that is completely rubbish. Our troops going to battle fully equipped nowadays. It's completely rubbish that we're minus body armour, etc. I fully disagree with arming the Syrian rebels. I know full well that arms change hands in the blink of an eye in the Middle East. God knows they'll be used against us in a matter of months. So I think maybe leave the weapons out a bit and look at the humanitarian aid first and foremost.
OK. The man in the fourth row there with the red tie. Yes, you, sir.
I think I definitely agree with Tessa and Boris that arming the Syrian rebels is wrong. I think it's against the UN policy, if I'm not wrong. And I also think it's a question of the Syrian government sovereignty in this case. And I think more should be done to work with China and Russia in order to broker a peace deal.
Syrian government sovereignty, meaning Assad should be allowed to sort out his own country. Is that what you mean by
that?
Melanie Phillips, do you agree with that?
Well, I think I agree with what's been said, that arming the Syrian rebels would be a really, really bad move. But this is a really hideous situation. There are no good outcomes for us or for anyone from this. What you have is a war between, on the one hand, Assad and Iran and the Soviet Union, versus rebels, Al-Qaeda, Islamists, and possibly America. Now, I don't think that the Prime Minister had a good G8 at all. I do take the view that what he did was foolish in the extreme, extremely stupid anti-diplomacy, made the British look ridiculous, and allowed President Putin, who doesn't seem to me to be someone I would like to have back to tea with my grandma, look as if he was running the whole show. And my reading, I don't know whether this is true, but I read in the press that it was Mr. Cameron who tried to gee up a very reluctant President Obama to think about arming the Syrian rebels, and thus led Obama to the brink of doing that, and then said, oh my goodness, I can't get it through my own parliament. What a mess. The fact is that if the rebels, Al-Qaeda, the Islamists, win in Syria, nobody should be under any illusion that there will be human rights and democracy. It will be awful for the Syrians, and it will be awful for us. But no one should be under any illusion also that if Assad remains, it will be terrible for his people, who he has butchered in such large number, but also terrible for us, because Syria is a rogue state. It has been funding, arming, organising terror against Western interests for many years, and it is the pawn of Iran. And this is the bigger game here. I don't believe one can negotiate with Russia. I don't believe one can negotiate with Assad. I don't believe one can negotiate with Iran.
Can one do anything?
I believe that the key to this, if we're going to do anything, we should have our eye fixed on where our interests lie. And where our interests lie, as the West's interests lie, is in neutralising Iran. We have allowed Iran the time over many years, through this farce of talking to people who cannot be talked to pursue its pursuit, to continue with its pursuit of a nuclear bomb with which it intends, it says, to commit genocide against Israel, a state which has declared for the last 25 years war against us. That is the problem. That is the problem, the defeatism of the British people against a clear threat to this country's interests. You are the problem.
I was with you. Melanie, I was with you all the way. I was with you all the way until you said we've got to neutralise Iran, and then I just.
You laugh. Neutralise Iran. The British audience laughs. How trivial of you. How incredibly ignorant of you. Do you not understand what a threat this country is to us? No, you don't.
All right. Melanie,
Paranoia. Paranoia.
OK, hold on a second. Melanie, wait a minute. All right. Who said paranoia? Because maybe you want to comment on what, maybe enlarge on what you said, and then I come to Ed Davey. You don't want to speak? No.
Yes, I do.
You do. Go on then.
I agree with Melanie Phillips in that it is turning into a proxy war between America on one hand and Iran on the other. But excuse me. But I have to say as well, why does she always have to bring it back to Iran and we can't negotiate it with Iran and Israel?
Because it's the most dangerous.
It's very irrational.
How is it?
Why can we not deal with Iran?
Why is it irrational?
Where's your evidence that we cannot deal with Iran?
The evidence is, if you know
where's your evidence that Syria was
let her answer your
I'll
question.
tell you why it's not rational to think you can negotiate with Iran, because Iran is currently run by people who believe, as a matter of religious belief, that if they bring about the apocalypse, if they bring about literally the end of the world...
They have never said that. That's
Would you let me perhaps speak,
false.
or is it entirely rational to stop somebody from speaking?
Sorry, go ahead.
They believe that if they bring about the apocalypse, they will bring to earth the Shia Messiah. That's the people you're dealing with.
The normal Iranian does not believe that.
All right,
I'm afraid you are simply
all right, the two of you can meet up afterwards. I'm going to... no, hold on, Boris. I want to bring Ed Davey in. Melanie Phillips said that the Prime Minister made a mess of the G8, in effect, by encouraging Obama to send forces into Syria.
Let me come to that, but I do just want to say your comments, Melanie, on Iran couldn't have been more poorly timed. There's just been an election in Iran. Here we have a new president of Iran, President Rouhani. If you read the Financial Times today, one of his advisors has written about wanting to make sure that we can reach out and telling the West, if we can reach out, there are ways that we can deal with the nuclear problem and the other tensions, and surely we should be doing that, and rather than some of the words we've just heard from
Melanie. The new president of Iran, the new president...
Melanie, let him go on and finish his point. He's had quite a good say.
But let me come back to the question, which of course was on Syria. There are a few things that...
This current government broke promises to us. Who's to say Iran government is not going to break their promises?
Okay, carry on, Ed David. Don't put a microphone to people until I call them, if you don't mind, because we've got a lot of people wanting to get in. Sorry, go on.
On Syria, we are not arming the Syrian rebels. What we are doing is giving huge amounts of humanitarian assistance. We are providing non-lethal assistance to some of the rebels, but most importantly, all our efforts are on the diplomatic track. And far from the Prime Minister failing at the G8, quite the contrary. He managed to get an agreement with 7 actions, with all the members of the G8 signing up to that. That was a real achievement. And actually, I think the relationship between Obama and Putin, between Kerry, Lavrov and Haig, has actually been improving. If you look at what they are doing, they are working together. We're going to have to try to work with the Russians to turn this round, because the Russians are the biggest sponsor of the Assad regime. And unless we get the diplomacy with the Russians right, nothing will happen. We'll still see the bloodshed. So diplomacy is the main thing, and working with the Russians is right, and you could not be more wrong.
Just before we leave that point, I'll come to you, Russell, in a moment. If you're not going to use weapons, why go to all the trouble of getting the EU to lift the ban on providing weapons?
But Boris was right on this. This is about raising the pressure.
Is that not a dangerous step to take if you don't actually intend to do it? I mean, you've said you don't. He doesn't think the government intends to do it. Tessa Jowell says nobody's going to do it. So it's just a bluff.
We have to raise the pressure on the Assad regime, just like the Prime Minister was talking about at the G8, that Assad had to go, and the military regime under Assad, we would work with them at the negotiations at Geneva for a transitional government if they got rid of Assad. So all this is about putting pressure on the Syrian regime so we can get a peaceful solution without having to resort to violence. I think that is a very, very constructive approach by the Prime Minister.
Russell Brand.